Okay, so we're looking at Blake's London today from the AQA anthology. And what we're going to attempt to do is in less than 15 minutes ideally, is cover five really key annotations about the poem and then layer on some contextual factors as well. Okay, so we're going to try and fit that all into 15 minutes. Should take us 10 if we are zippy zippy. So the acronym that I use to get my first annotations on any poem, whether it's an unseen poem or the first time you're studying an anthology poem, is FIRST. And what that stands for is first and last line, imagery, repetition, structure, and title. Because all poems that you come across are going to have um, all of those things. All poems are going to have all five of those things in one way or another. So you automatically have something to comment on in every poem you come across. So I'm going to start by just identifying where those things are in this poem. So the first and last line, very simple, right there. Okay, so that's my F. I'm also just going to be drawing a line between them because I can get some structure points in the exam by simply comparing the start of the poem to the end of the poem. Okay, so it's a really easy piece of structure that you can analyze again in any poem that you come across. The I stands for imagery. Now, the imagery can come from anywhere in the poem. I quite like "And the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls." I think that's a really nice one. So I'm going to have that as my I. So I'm just going to label it with I. Then for repetition, your repetition can really be anything. It can be individual words, it can be motifs, it can be phrases, it can even be repetition of ideas or semantic or lexical fields. So it's quite a broad category of kind of poetic features that involve repeating something. I quite like the repetition of every because we see that a long way through. Um, so we can also tally that with each because it basically means the same thing. Every face, every man, every ban, um, every blackening church of balls. So we have it one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 times plus each, which we can call an extra one. Okay, so there's my repetition. I'm just going to put an R next to it. In terms of structure, the one thing that I would probably comment on, something that really sticks out, is the fact that there are two lines that are much longer than any of the others. Okay, so I might just comment on the structure there. What am I going to say about it? I don't know yet. We'll see when we come to it. Okay, but there's a structural point because it stands out from a distance, so it's clearly structural. And then finally, although ironically it's the first thing that we come across in a poem, we're going to be looking at the title and just label that T. Okay, so when we're analyzing a poem, what we do is we think about it in terms of an experience for a reader. Okay, so anyone reading a poem will start with the title and then they'll move through it chronologically. So I always start with the title with my annotations, then I move into my first and last line, then my imagery, etc. Okay, so what do we come across first? Well, it is a one-word title. It is just London. Okay, so really, really easy place to start. We know that this is the capital, and because it is the capital city, we can potentially refer to this really cool term of synecdoche, which is where one thing stands for the whole thing. Okay, so for example, a face. If I said there are lots of new faces here tonight, that would be, your face stands for your entire self. Okay, your face stands out. Or if I said all hands on deck, I'm not asking everyone to put their hands on the ground. All hands, because your hand is what you do your busy work with. All report here. Okay, in this case, London is standing for the whole of England. Okay, so this could be a comment on England writ large. Okay, so that's the first place to start. So that's the first impression we get. What is going to be said about it? We don't have any, um, there is no judgment at this point. So we can't tell whether this is going to be a celebration, whether it's going to be neutral, or whether it's going to be wholly negative. Okay, so let's jump in. I wander through each chartered street is my first line. Okay, so there's nothing particularly damning about this. I wonder. Okay, so this is clearly going to be kind of observational. Okay, so without a strict agenda. Okay, there's no agenda. If you're wandering through somewhere, you don't know where you are going. You're just going to end up wherever. The word chartered, however, is certainly a bit more damning. Okay, chartered meaning that it is owned, that it is regulated, that it is managed, that it is recorded. Okay, so all of these ideas associated with this concept of being chartered. Okay, we have chartered repeated in the next line as well. So streets and rivers should not be things that are chartered. They should belong to everybody. However, this kind of sense of ownership is our first hint that potentially there is not, it's just a hint at this point that not everything is great in terms of the power structures in the city slash the country. Okay, but it's a subtle hint at this point, nothing too concerning. However, when we get to the end of the poem, blights with plagues, the marriage hearse. Okay, so blights and plagues, incredibly negative imagery. Hearse, obviously a funeral car. Okay, so this is much more damning than the start. It is much more damning. Okay, so notice that the title and the first line are not particularly damning. They're just dropping subtle little hints that we're going to be making some kind of a social or political commentary. But by the end, we've got blights, plagues, and hearse, much more damning language. And the fact that it is blighting with plagues the marriage hearse, suggesting that marriages are doomed, suggests that this harlot and the newborn that has come from her are indicative of social decay. Okay, things have gone wrong in terms of morals. Okay, so social decay, moral corruption has taken place. Okay, so it starts fairly, easygoing. By the end, it is incredibly damning with the language choices. Okay, there we have our first and last line identified. What about the imagery that we selected? Well, let's comment on the imagery. The hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Okay, there's a few things to talk about there. Okay, so the hapless soldier, okay, the hapless soldier gives a sense of innocence and futility, because this is a hapless soldier, not one who is able and confident, but hapless. Sigh is obviously indicative of some kind of when do you sigh? Well, you sigh when you have a kind of a hard realization, right? You go, oh, right? So potentially this is a realization for the soldier of the realities of war. Okay, why else is it a sigh? A sigh is never associated with good vibes, is it? Runs in blood down palace walls. Okay, so blood obviously linking to death in war. Death in war. And then if it's running down palace walls, where is the blame? Okay, so blood is both death but also blame. And who is being blamed? The monarchy. Okay, those in power. Okay, they are basically sacrificing the lives of soldiers, and we don't know which conflict is specifically being referred to. It's deliberately not identified, but the monarchy are being blamed kind of more generally for their tacit endorsement of huge scale death when it comes to starting wars and sending soldiers out to fight in them. Okay, so there is a really nice piece of imagery that we can be kind of identifying there, right? Then we move on to repetition, okay? And the repetition of the word every is a really easy thing to comment on, right? It just shows, and this word every is a determiner, okay? Just so you can make reference to the repetition of the determiner. You could even, if you wanted to show off your skills, you could talk about the repetition of every in the anaphora that characterizes the second stanza, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if you want to impress with vocabulary. But the key thing here is this determiner of every shows that this is a universal experience. Okay, what he's talking about is universal. So it relates to everyone in London. Okay, this is everywhere. Now that just shows the scale of what he's complaining about. The scale of the woe, if you will. Okay, marks of woe. Easy peasy, right? There we have a comment on the repetition. Finally, structurally speaking, what are we going to say about the extra long line? Okay, I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. The meter is kind of disturbed by this longer line, okay? I wander through each chartered street. Can you recognize this rhythm that's coming up? I wander through each chartered street. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow. So we've got iambic rhythm here, haven't we? Okay. However, in order to make that work, you have to unstress the word near, and near is clearly a stressed syllable. And so it forces you to read this slightly funnily. So I'll just do it for you so you can see what I mean, because it's quite a nebulous idea. Right, I wander through each chartered street, not having to do anything weird there, near where the chartered Thames does flow. Near where, okay? Near where, okay? That's clearly a stressed syllable, okay? So we have stress on that syllable, which makes this whole line feel dodgy, okay? So it is a disruption from the very beginning, literally the second line, disruption of the rhythm. And what happens when you have to stop with your rhythm and get confused about rhythm? It forces you to dwell on that line, dwell on that image near where the chartered Thames does flow. Okay, it makes you notice that we have chartered twice. Okay, so it forces you to dwell on things. Anytime we have a disruption in rhythm, we can talk about how it slows your reading down, and therefore it slows your impression down and makes you think for slightly longer before moving on to the next line. So there's a nice structural point which relates to the form of the poem, and we've already done our title. So those are our 5 key annotations. Now we layer on top the context. So here's the thing to consider about the context. Really, really simple. Blake, the poet, was another romantic poet. Okay, so part of the romantic ilk, social justice warrior. That's what what we would call him these days. He rejected the Enlightenment's obsession with progress and rationality, particularly as represented by the effect of the Industrial Revolution in England, poverty, injustice, and oppression as he saw it. Okay, so what I'm trying to say there, in terms of AO3, is he didn't think that industrialization equals progress. If anything, he saw it as a kind of a magnification of poverty, injustice, and oppression. When we develop the country or when we develop our society around mechanization and pollution and I guess, capitalism and people kind of suffering as a result of that, then we end up with a really kind of unpleasant situation to be in, rather than one representative of progress and improvements. Okay, so it's really easy to link to any of the negative things that he says there. So that's a really kind of juicy AO3 link. Okay, so AO3 link, really juicy. You can link to anything where he is negative about London and the state that it's in. Okay, now to contextualize this poem comes from his collection called Songs of Innocence and Experience, which is broken into 2 sections. Songs of Innocence, which are all about his childhood and how happy he was and how invested in nature he was. And then the second part of this collection, which is called Songs of Experience, which is much more kind of cynical, where he recognized the degradation of society and of nature as he grew up. Okay, so it's really it's kind of like the headline piece of Songs of Experience, where we get to see that his impression as a poet has changed since he was kind of young and naive and idealistic. Okay, so this poem, if we want to make an AO3 link to his biography, it is representative of his decline in terms of positivity and hope for the world. Okay, so we did it in just under 15 minutes. 5 key annotations, 2 really nice juicy contextual points that you can link together. We've got AO1, AO2, and AO3 covered. Nicely done.